1961, the great science fiction, outstanding novel, famous, infamous, called by some the most famous sci-fi novel in history, Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. At the beginning of the novel, we get the story of one Michael Valentine Smith, a human born on Mars. His parents were part of a mission to Mars. He was born there. None of them survive, only him. And at the novel's opening, he is being rescued or has just been rescued by a Terran novel. Having grown up on Mars, he is returned to Earth. Because of the biological connection and the laws, such as the famous Larkin decision, he has claim to patents worth billions of dollars on Earth, including the Lyell drive, the propulsion that allows humans to go to places like Mars, patents and properties and corporations. And because of an obscure colonial aspect of this Larkin decision, he could be considered the lawful owner of Mars, even though it is inhabited by Martians in this universe. Michael Valentine Smith then is the man that everybody wants to pressure, to control, to get a hold of his wealth, and there's a whole complicated story that develops around it. What I found really marvelous about Heinlein's novel is the degree to which he is very libertarian, very skeptical, very cynical. He clearly gives us, through the protagonists who help Michael Smith, this view of the world that is not one that buys into ideologies or nationalisms or even religions. It is quite a cynical, very realistic, gritty view of human nature, and therein lay the rub for me. Now, I don't know if maybe Heinlein did this on purpose. Maybe, like a great painter, he was trying to convey something about the duality of man. But the very basic setup for the story at the beginning is incredibly naive. And then the bulk of the novel is incredibly cynical. Let me clarify. There's an incredible degree of suspension of disbelief that is necessary to believe that a refugee living on Mars, regardless of his ancestry, who is naive to all human culture and ways, or understands his rights, or has the means to defend them, would ever be a major issue of contention. It just isn't realistic in any stretch of the imagination when you've created, even in a fictional realm, a situation where this guy is worth untold billions, immeasurable wealth when you consider potentially owns an entire planet. And despite the obvious critique in that of law and colonialism and ownership and whatever that Heinlein intends, to believe that the guy is going to live for 5 minutes after humans find him. When the crew finds him and finds out who he is and rescues him to return him to Earth, in any realistic scenario, they're going to figure out how to cheat him out of what he's supposed to get, and he's going to slip out of an airlock and be gone. When Smith gets to Earth, they put him in a hospital, isolated from the press. So isolated do they keep this character that they are able to replace him with a copy to give some brief TV appearances to keep everybody calm and that everything's under control. And yet, they then go see this anonymous man who has been hidden from the masses and kept completely under their security thumb and try to pressure him rather politely to sign away his rights and take advantage of his being so naive to human culture. Instead of, it's the suspension of disbelief necessary to even imagine that Michael Smith is going to survive coming back from Mars and get to Earth, to believe that they don't just kill him and make the replacement be him for a little while until they can smooth the transition. I mean, it really is just ridiculous. He manages to make an escape, or rather, others who become involved rescue him, take him away. And there's a long middle section of this novel. Well, really, the rest of it moves rather slow, but there's a very long middle section that was oddly reminiscent of the novels of Ayn Rand, where you get the long soliloquies and discussions and dialogues about what we believe and why, and people always wanting to stop what they're doing to discuss their sort of global ideologies. It actually is very tiresome and wearisome in the middle. And I reached a point where I thought if I heard the word grok one more time, I was probably going to be sick. Getting a little fogged up there. Let's try this. In the Star Trek universe, the phrase grok or grokking actually has an odd crossover, because when the original Star Trek series was canceled, and this was sort of the peak years following the fame of Heinlein's novel, it had become very popular in science fiction and sort of hippie circles, the phrase to grok, which is to know, to understand, to drink, literally to be in this sort of oneness with one another and this growing closer to closeness thing. And so it was interesting to read the novel finally and get some insight into grokking. And after a while, you get tired of hearing about it. It gets to be this word that's used over and over and over again in the middle of the novel. And this was my biggest complaint, that it is so naive, requiring the suspension of disbelief at the beginning, and then we move into the cynical section, and the two seem very out of place. Now, even as a religious person, the critique that he does of religion is generally spot on. His critique of politics is pretty much spot on. All of the cynicism that we get later through the character of Dr. Jubal Harshaw, the exposure to the Fosterite cult or church, all of that is some of it's very humorous. Some of it was so good that, I'm reading it on Kindle and I'm screenshotting it and sending it to some friends because it's humorously insightful, or it's just that insightful. There's a lot of good stuff in it, but it goes on for a very long time and is extraordinarily slow. So the novel is very interesting. It's very historic, and it is very ideologically fascinating in places. And I certainly recommend it just based on its historical significance. But I think what I found most significant about the novel, what I thought was truly the best, was the science fiction quality of it, which is to say, all extraterrestrial experiences in sci-fi are extensions of the human experience. I mean, this is why Mr. Spock with pointed ears and being biracial tells us something about ourselves that we can experience as through his character in a fictional setting, as if we were him. And it allows us to make other that thing which might hit too close to home, or allow us to hit close to home in a fictional setting, to get across something close to home in a fictional setting that might otherwise have been deflected as other. That being said, I'm always fascinated. The more alien we can make a culture seem, the more off the wall, the better. One of the things I've done with my collection of short stories, Pictures from the Milky Way, trying to imagine creatures that are as different as I possibly can, though knowing that I'm limited by my human experience. They all say something about humanity, but I would like to be in a universe now, a world that is filled with all of these various sci-fi universes. Trying to find something that is remotely original is difficult to do, and I enjoy doing that. And what Heinlein does as early as 61 is give us a Martian culture that does not have our gender, our hierarchy, our experience of being, doesn't experience time and history the way we do, or even death. Dead Martians apparently become old ones, and they're not thought of as dead, and then younger ones are only an egg, and there's nests, although it isn't clearly described their physiology, whether there's anything remotely like being an ornithoid or being a reptilian. We don't know, but there's eggs, there's nests, there's the sharing of scarce resources, the taking of water like a sacrament that makes you water brothers. It is about as alien as you can possibly get, while at the same time clearly intending to convey something in the grokking, and the grokking of it, the experience of it about unity and oneness and timelessness that we could also experience potentially. So it is meant to tell us something, and yet his Martians are about as different, alien, extraterrestrial as I think human imagination can get until we meet one and get an idea of what they could be like as any that I've ever seen before. And at a time when people with funny looking helmets that were otherwise human were Martians on TV and movies of, not great production value or at an early stage of production value in cinematic history. So Heinlein, from a science fiction standpoint, wow, he gives us this incredible culture on Mars and allows us to see with cynical eyes through Jubal Hershaw, with questioning skepticism, and through the naive eyes of the man from Mars trying to grok it. I think that's very significant and important. But it is not an action novel. It is not Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, or Star Trek. It is not something that is fast-paced, and it's not fun. Rather, it's difficult to get through in places, was my experience. It felt like some of it was, like reading a physics textbook with things that are way over my head because I don't know physics, but feeling like it's work to try to stick with it. Not that the things are as hard to grasp as physics, but it's just sort of hard to be. It's like being trapped in someone's conversation at Harshaw's house and not able to get away for a long stretch, and you're ready to go home. But people keep saying wise and important and insightful things, and yet there's nothing about the novel that reads quickly. There's nothing about it that reads fun. I had been, since I had broken my cycle of Facebook addiction. I vlogged about that months ago. I started reading again, and I have rejoined Facebook for reasons I also vlogged about, but I am still reading every night, and I'm limiting my addiction to social media. I'm doing this because it's more fun, and yet I was not able to binge Heinlein Stranger in a Strange Land at night before bed the way I was the works of Bradbury or even the works of Philip K. Dick, because there's a long philosophical thing in each chapter. I found myself being tired out by it and needing the time to think about it before drifting off to sleep rather than keep reading, because that's sort of the slow pace at which it crawls. And yet it's a very significant novel. It's filled with all of that fascinating, interesting stuff. In the long run, I would highly recommend it as well. The reason that I finally read it, because I had heard about it my whole life and heard about its significance in the history of sci-fi, but I had not read it. Now I can say I have read it, but it is an interesting experience, and I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, because unlike some of the works of Bradbury or even Dick that I recently had reread from my college years, I can't imagine going back and reading Heinlein Stranger in a Strange Land. I doubt that I will ever be up to that, as long as there's other things to read in the world that I still need to get to. But all in all, in line with his reputation, it is brilliant, it's insightful, it is interesting, but it is very difficult in places. Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land, read it, love it, grok it completely. Grok it. And the grokking of it, and the coming closer with it, and the grokking of it. And read the book, you'll get it. Live long and prosper, and we will see you next time. Thank you.